You done now?
Hi, everybody. This is Bob Gale, co-creator of Back to the Future, and you're listening to Brad Gilmore.
Doc! Okay, relax, Doc. It's me. It's Martin.
No, it can't be. Just sent you back to the future.
Yeah. Oh, I know you did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Great Scott.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
Whoa, this is heavy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast. The only podcast looking back in time, the greatest film trilogy of all time, Back to the Future. I'm your friend in time, Brad Gilmore. Here we are, episode 100 of the show. We finally made it through 9 seasons. I get to the 13th episode of season 9, which happens to coincide with the 100th edition of the podcast. Want to thank everybody who's joined me since, May of 2015 when I first started this thing through the 9 seasons. This is the penultimate episode of season 9, and we have made it a grand one. For the 100th episode, we have 4 incredible guests, one of which is returning. We're talking about 2 major movies from the 1980s that have Back to the Future ties to them. Of course, joining me today, first we'll hear from Caseen Gaines. Caseen, who's been on this show twice before, once to talk about his book, We Don't Need Roads, the making of the Back to the Future trilogy. And the second time he was on here talking about Old Man Biff. And I love that podcast episode with Caseen and Norm so much. We actually made it a chapter. I say we. Why do people with the show say we? Because it's just them. It's just me. So I made it a chapter in my book, Back from the Future, about Old Man Biff and what I thought about his disappearance in the cutscene from Back to the Future Part 2. But anyway, Caseen is back with another incredible book, this time a visual history, the ultimate visual history of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the ultimate visual history, with a foreword from Drew Barrymore, an introduction from Kathleen Kennedy. Incredible project that I'm excited. I haven't seen it yet. I'm saying it's incredible because I know Caseen wouldn't do anything but that. I haven't seen it yet, but I have the pre-order, so I'm ready to get it. And then joining us right after that, Laker Jim, Jake, Big Bob, from the Fletchcast, Laker Jim's Fletchcast, which you can get wherever podcasts are. They're not sold, wherever podcasts are available. You can get Laker Jim's Fletchcast. And of course, it's talking about the 1985 Chevy Chase classic Fletch, a movie that's come up a couple times this season on the show when I talked to Steve Franks in part 2 of our conversation to start off the season. We talked about Fletch and why it was a inspiration for him as well as Back to the Future when making Psych, the hit television show Psych. And we talked about Clue in those episodes too. The 85 trilogy, guys. It has merit to it. If you like one of those movies, you like both of them. All 3 of them, excuse me. But Laker Jim's Fletchcast, they joined me on the show. We talk about the 1985 classic Fletch with Chevy Chase. We talk about its sequel that is not as beloved, but it is by at least half of my household. I haven't asked where my cat stands on the matter, but I will get a word from her and deliver that back here shortly. And then we talk about the revival, which when you're hearing this, the trailer is already out. If you haven't seen it, John Hamm takes over the role of Fletch, and Confess Fletch is going to be coming to theaters and, was it Stars? I believe it's Stars on September. Let me do this real quick. I'll do a little quick Google. I should have done this before I started recording. But I like to not overthink these intros too much. Confess Fletch comes out soon. September the 16th is when Fletch will debut. And I'm trying to see where we can see it. Confess Fletch will be out. Hold on. What does it say? Premium video on demand. Showtime. I said Stars. It's on Showtime. Showtime and theaters. September the 16th. So we talk about that. And, of course, we talk to the Laker Gym guys about Back to the Future, what they love about the film. We talk about rankings. We talk about side characters. And we talk about Big Bob mentioned some nitpicks. And so does Laker Gym. We talk some nitpicks about Back to the Future, which is something I've done with Daniel J. Glenn before on this podcast, but I was always welcoming the conversation of the Back to the Future nitpicks. There we go. Netflix nitpicks, all the same. We're going to start off with Caseen gains and then go into the Fletchcast. So enjoy this episode of Back to the Future, the podcast, the 100th edition. We start now.
In 1975, he directed Jaws. In 1978, he directed Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In 1981, he directed Raiders of the Lost Ark. And now, Steven Spielberg brings us E.T., the Extraterrestrial. We will witness the arrival, the search, the desertion, the fear, the discovery, the friendship,
I'm keeping him.
the secret, the love, the warning, the signal, the mystery, the danger, the intrusion, the wonderment, the enchantment, the hope. The connection has been made. Universal Pictures presents Steven Spielberg's E.T., the Extraterrestrial.
And he joins us right now. He is the author of the brand new E.T., the Extraterrestrial, the Ultimate Visual History. We're excited to welcome back to the program, Mr. Caseen Gaines. Caseen, how are you, my friend?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Man, you know, you stay busy all the time. You stay writing. You're never not working on another project. You and I first got to know each other over the We Don't Need Roads. They're making the Back to the Future trilogy. Since then, you've done Dark Crystal. You've done a book called Footnotes, which is a really interesting thing. I suggest everybody go check out. And now here we are, E.T., the Extraterrestrial, the Ultimate Visual History. Why was E.T. the next project?
You know, I felt like I had written about everything on Earth. I had to go out into the solar system. No. E.T. was kind of a holy grail project. You know, I write a lot about the 80s, and it really doesn't get any better than E.T. I mean, it's Steven Spielberg's most personal film. It's a film that he remains most proud of. And it was just this amazing juggernaut when it came out in 1982. And so what better time than the 40th anniversary to take a look back at the making of this truly phenomenal film.
Of course. I mean, this movie, there's so many things iconic about it. Like you said, 1982, 40 years is kind of hard to believe that that's where we are with this film. But it's an ultimate visual history. So people who haven't ever seen one of these books before, they're very interesting. It's not your standard project, right? This involves a lot of imagery and production notes and things of that nature, right?
There is a little bit of everything in this book. And one of the things that we really wanted to prioritize is if you aren't familiar with filmmaking, we wanted to take you through the entire journey. And what I mean by that is there's transcripts of meeting notes between Steven Spielberg and producer Kathleen Kennedy and screenwriter Melissa Matheson. And they're just transcripts, and we just stuck them in the book. There are Polaroids from when they were designing the E.T. puppet. And, you know, they're for the first time being published in this book. There are production notes, storyboards, even the audience response cards from when they had test screenings of E.T. You can go through the entire ride. And so it was really interesting for me to not only do interviews and write a text that captures the history, but if you look through the book, it is a scrapbook almost of the entire ET phenomenon, going back to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, all the way through to the 40th anniversary.
You know, it's just incredible that people had the wherewithal to preserve some of these things. Do you know what I mean? I guess we live in such an age now where we document our everyday life and we document things that we're working on. We have the wherewithal, understanding, and know how to do that. Are you shocked by some of the things that they held on to?
Actually, not only am I shocked, but to be honest with you, I think even the folks at Amblin and Universal were shocked, because it wasn't just going to their archives, the effects people. There are some photos in the book that are Steven Spielberg's personal photos, actually. So I can promise that every single person in the world is going to see something for the first time in this book.
E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the Ultimate Visual History is available tomorrow when most of you are listening to this. Let me ask you this, Caseen. You have a foreword from Drew Barrymore, who famously, this is one of her big roles that kicked off her career as a young child star. How did that come about?
That came about because we asked and we beat down the door. So, and let me tell you something.
Persistence pays, right?
Persistence pays. But let me tell you something. This is completely true. Drew Barrymore is exactly who you want her to be, exactly who you hope she is. I've interviewed a lot of people for a lot of different projects, not only this book, and she is just one of the most wholesome and genuine people that I've ever spoken to. And, you know, my personal story with this book is, you know, when I spoke to her, we already had a bit of a layout for the book. And so while I was speaking with her, she was looking at the book, and to hear her reaction to seeing some of these images, she was blown away by it. And I think if you can impress Drew Barrymore, you know, that's good enough for me. That's all I need. So I was so glad that she contributed forward. I think what she wrote is absolutely beautiful and touching and poignant, and I'm glad to have her on board.
It's just incredible too to have a film like this that just continued. Like you said, you've talked about Dark Crystal, which was definitely a cult film, but a huge popular one nowadays. And Back to the Future trilogy, of course, everybody is aware of. And E.T. is really, because I know they say that Jaws was the first blockbuster, right? And then kind of Back to the Future was the summer phenomenon, but E.T. was right there in the middle. What do you think about it was able to have this staying power 40 years later?
You know, that's a really interesting question, and one that I've thought about a lot over the course of working on this book. And I think it's something about the humanity in the film. You know, we think about it now as this juggernaut, this big phenomenon and blockbuster, as you said, but when you go back and watch it, it's a really intimate film. You know, it's very personal feeling. As I mentioned before, it was personal to Steven Spielberg working on it, but it also feels very relatable to everyone seeing it. I think everyone, whether you're a child or you're an adult, has had some feeling of loneliness. Certainly, we just are, you know, coming out of, hopefully knock wood, coming out of this pandemic, where even if you were at home with other people, we were isolated and lonely from the greater world. And I think that the story of E.T. really speaks to that longing for a human connection. And it's something very hopeful and optimistic that you can find that connection sometimes in someone or something that really bears very little resemblance to you. You know, it doesn't have to be someone who's just like you or thinks just like you, but you can still find a way to connect if you look for it.
Yeah, I think that you really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, of course, this movie was popular when it came out, nominated for 9 Academy Awards, if my notes have me correct, won 4 of those. Steven Spielberg's most personal film, you said. Why is this his most personal film?
It's his most personal film for a number of reasons, but I think the biggest one is that Steven really was like Elliot in a lot of ways as a kid. And if you recall, in E.T., the parents are divorced. We only ever see the mother. Steven Spielberg's own parents divorced when he was a teenager, and he always kind of wanted to explore that feeling of loneliness that he felt. And what's funny is he sort of imagined for himself having an imaginary friend. You know, he had siblings, but he didn't really connect with them in the same way as he would have a friend, but he just didn't have that person in his life. And so E.T. is sort of his wish fulfillment story. Also, just from a technical standpoint, Steven Spielberg put a lot of his own money into financing this film. It was a hard film to kind of get off the ground, even after the success of Jaws and Close Encounters and Raiders. You know, this wasn't what at the time, what people thought of as a Steven Spielberg film. This was not a Steven Spielberg film in the conventional sense. E.T. was really something that people thought was a child sort of thing, a Disney movie, said pejoratively. So Steven Spielberg had a lot riding on this film personally, and the fact that it was such a phenomenon, I think he really felt very validated by it, and I think it also shaped his filmmaking in a lot of ways and encouraged him to kind of really always focus on telling stories that he wants to tell.
This movie, of course, captured a generation's imagination. I think that that's easy for us all to say. It was a popular film when it was released. And to me, I was actually watching, did you happen to see Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers on Disney Plus? Have you seen that film?
I saw it and I loved it. Yes, I saw it.
It's so great. To me, it's almost a modern day Roger Rabbit-esque kind of movie.
Right.
But there was an advertisement in the movie for Batman versus E.T., and which I got a kick out of, right? And it actually made me think at the time, why was there never a sequel? I mean, this seems like a movie that could easily have some sort of sequel to it, or a retelling years later. You know, E.T. comes back. Was there ever any plan for a sequel to E.T.?
There was a lot of discussion about a sequel, and in fact, if you go back and look through the archives, and I write about this a bit in the book, you know, Steven Spielberg was a little bit cagey around 1982, 1983 about whether or not there would be a sequel. Certainly the studio wanted a sequel, but he always felt like if there was going to be a sequel to E.T., it had to be something that made sense. It had to be something that wasn't just going to retell the same story, and something that would warrant being its own film and not just have to rest on the laurels and success of the first one. And he just never had that project. He just never, you know, he was satisfied with E.T. He felt like he said everything that he wanted to say about this particular story through this film. And there wasn't really a reason for him to go back to the well. And in fact, in a lot of ways, he thought the only reason would be for the financial benefit of it. And that's not a good enough reason to make a sequel. I mean, if only everyone in Hollywood thought that, right?
That's a rarity.
That's a rarity, right? But he says actually, both he and Kathleen Kennedy, who I spoke to for the book, both of them, they both said that's one of the things in their entire career they're most proud of is rejecting the pressure to make an E.T. sequel, because the pressure was certainly there, and they stuck to it.
Now, the thing about Steven Spielberg and a collaborator friend of his, Mr. George Lucas, of course, they made Indiana Jones together. George Lucas, the man who created Star Wars, they both did something in the early 2000s, and I just want to know what your read is on it and what the fan community felt about the special edition of E.T., because a lot of people fall in love with the movie the way that they've seen it. And as we know from the specialized editions of the Star Wars movies that came out in the late 90s, people felt very strongly about the changes that George Lucas made, right? About Han shooting first and not Greedo, things of that nature. There was a special edition of E.T. Were there significant changes, and was there any kind of backlash to that change?
So there were significant changes to the 2002 release of E.T. You know, the one that sort of garnered the most attention was they digitally took out a number of guns towards the end of the film and replaced them with walkie-talkies in the hands of police officers. That was certainly a very controversial one, but, you know, for me, the most controversial change is that they digitized the puppet's head. so that, you weren't really seeing a lot of the E.T. puppet in its original form. I actually spoke to Steven Spielberg about this, and I asked him about this, and I'll admit I didn't exactly know, how that portion of our chat was going to go because there was a lot of backlash to it. But, Steven said something that I think is very fascinating, and you evoked George Lucas in the question. He said, at the time, while those special editions of the Star Wars films were controversial, they also were very successful. And there were people that did like that and enjoy the upgrades. And that, the thought was in the 70s or in the 80s, special effects were not what you could do in the 90s. And so if you were just going to touch up the effects and bring the films up to modern standards, why not do it? I mean, Lucas, I think, went a little bit further in terms of changing some of the plot points and things like that. But, just in terms of giving the film a little bit of an aesthetic facelift, sure, let's go for it. So he didn't really think that would be a problem, but he learned that you don't really have to do that. People aren't looking to upgrade their memories. People are just looking to revisit and relive their memories. And so he actually said the experience on the 2002 ET and the reaction to it made him promise that he would never do that again. And he has actually, since, for the last 20 years, he has held to that promise. The other thing that I want to sort of add, though, is Kathleen Kennedy, when I spoke to her, she said, folks really have to remember they all had very good intentions with that 2002 special edition. And particularly with the guns, this was a post 9/11 society now. They were working on this shortly after 9/11, and they sort of felt like, that's where the nation was. But it wasn't. People didn't like seeing that change, but they were trying to be sensitive to the world that now this 2002 edition was going to be coming out in. So it's an interesting perspective, but I do know for a fact that a bit of a spoiler, but Steven does in the book, he actually apologizes for the 2002 special edition and apologizes to anyone who was disappointed by it, and has sort of said any further home video, I just dated myself, right? Streaming or DVD or anything like that, releases will always be the 1982 version.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, there you go. I'm glad I asked that question. You got to talk to Steven Spielberg. You got to talk to Kathleen Kennedy. One of my favorite anecdotes from your Back to the Future book was when you were set to talk to Robert Zemeckis, of course, co-creator, co-writer, director, and the recording fails. Right?
Yeah.
Did you have any similar stories that happened on this project, or what was your just personal favorite interaction while making this book?
Well, so I'll tell you a funny story. It's not as good as the Zemeckis one, I don't think, but Kathleen Kennedy is a very busy person. She runs Lucasfilm, as I'm sure you know, and so I really had a hard time getting a hold of her. Not for any particular reason. She was happy to talk about ET for the book, but we couldn't schedule it at the same. We just couldn't work it out. And I ended up interviewing Frank Marshall, who also worked on ET, and Frank Marshall is Kathy Kennedy's husband. And so I'm asking him a couple of questions, and he says, well, that's really a better one for Kathy. And I said, to be honest with you, I'm having a little bit of a hard time reaching her. And he said, oh, don't worry about that. And once we got off the phone, about 15 minutes later, my phone rang, and it was Kathy Kennedy. So he cleared the path for me to get to her. And then we had a chat for, I'm not exaggerating, it probably was close to 3 hours.
Wow.
We spoke on the phone. And it was just fascinating. You really forget that all of these people that now have become, they've worked on all of our favorite films. Even if you aren't familiar with the name Frank Marshall or Kathleen Kennedy, look them up, look up their IMDb. I mean, every film they've worked on.
Right.
And at the time, they were really just young. They were like in their 20s making films with their friends. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, they were friends. They went to the same film school. You lose sight of that now because their work has become so iconic, but you really get a sense of that camaraderie and scrappiness and just almost Little Rascal style, let's put on a show that that became E.T., this phenomenon.
It's just incredible. Yeah, I mean, you're right. If people don't know the names Kathleen Kennedy or Frank Marshall, but you know Steven Spielberg, you're going to know the overwhelming majority of movies that they've had their name attached to and continue to have their name attached to. So really great. Caseen, it's awesome to talk to you, man. Again, the book is called E.T., the Extraterrestrial, the Ultimate Visual History. It is available on Amazon or wherever you get your books, available on August the 30th. So when many of you are hearing this tomorrow, Caseen Gaines, man, right. where can people find you, follow you, and see more of your books? Because E.T. is not it. You've done a lot of books, all great. Where can people find more out?
So people can find me at Caseen Gaines, CASEENGAINES, or CaseenGaines.com. Find me. I'm all over.
All over the place. Caseen Gaines, the author. Thank you so much for joining us today, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know where it is. I'm just getting a bird's eye view here, and,
What do you think? It's the bypass line, right?
I think it's the bypass line, yeah. I'm gonna need some pliers and, set of 30-weight ball bearings.
What?
Yeah, tell you what, I gotta go to my truck. If Fred gets here before I'm back, you can tell him to start without me.
What the hell you need ball bearings for?
Oh, come on, guys. It's so simple. Maybe you need a refresher course. Hey, it's all ball bearings nowadays.
And I'm so excited to have these guys join me on season 9 of Back to the Future, the podcast, because this film that we're about to talk about, that these guys have their own podcast about, is a part of 1985, and we're going to get into some theories I have about it. But joining me right now, we have Jake, Big Bob, and Laker Jim from the Fletchcast. Again, you can find them on all social media at I Am Fletchcast. Of course, talking about all things of Fletch. And they're joining me on the show. Jake, Jim, Bob, welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks, Brad. It's great.
Thank you very little.
I know you're a big fan of Fletch, but we are also huge Back to the Future fans. So I'm sure as much as you want to talk about Fletch, we want to talk Back to the Future.
Okay, Absolutely. Well, you know what? Look, we're going to talk about them both because let's just start here. I believe there's a thing I call the 85 trilogy. There are 3 films that if you're a fan of one of them, you're probably a diehard fan of the other 2. Back to the Future is one of them, Fletch is another, and I think Clue the movie is the 3rd. And there's a lot of crossover between all 3 of these films. But talk to me. Do you think that there's a credence to my theory here? Because I feel like I've always been a Fletch fan, I've always been a Back to the Future fan, and then I discover Clue the movie later on. At my Hollywood Video, and I rented it and was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing in the world. Christopher Lloyd plays a professor and a doctor both in 1985. I mean, you can't get any better than that. But am I right here? Is there something with these movies?
Yeah, I think what they all kind of share in common, and I think Fletch gets credit for this, and maybe those 2 movies don't get so much credit for, but I think it's the quotability of these movies. I mean, they are just chock full of quotes from start to finish that you can use in everyday life. And we all try to, I'm sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will tell you that Clue is probably the lesser of the 3 for me. I remember discovering it when we first got cable, years after it came out. But I think also with those 3 movies too, I think there's just a level of comfort that everyone loves. It's a movie you can put on again and again and again. And it's just something that, again, is just all 3 of the movies are just completely watchable. And I think that's where it really starts.
What do you think, Bob?
Now, how old a guy are you?
Me?
Yeah.
29.
So you discovered these movies. See, we're all in our 40s. You discovered these movies, you said, through renting them and everything.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
I give you credit, man.
Yeah.
I got to say this first. Somebody your age doesn't always have the same kind of passion that somebody our age has about movies that came out in 1985.
That's true.
And you nailed it. I think those 3 movie franchises are, I mean, the fact that, like you said earlier, they came out in the same year, 1985, is just such a banner year for 80s movies. But yeah, I think that those are the three big ones. And, Clue is ranked up right up there with me as well with Fletch and Back to the Future. But yeah, I applaud your effort for your generation and your age to go out and find appreciation. Do you primarily enjoy 80s movies, or are you pretty much a movie buff all across?
No, I'm an 80s guy, and I don't know what it is. I mean, I like all the 80s films, and I think, and my listeners will know this, I mean, I'm the youngest of four. My brother born in 69, the other one in 76, my sister in 86, and I was in 92. So we have like a nice breadth of a generation gap between us. And I think that films, especially ones in the 85 and the 80s, it kind of hits all of our sweet spots. Right, it's a little bit right before I was born. It's right when my sister was born. My brothers were teenagers during the time, and I think it's the language that we can all speak. Everyone can speak Back to the Future. Everyone can speak Fletch or Clue, and that must be kind of what the connection is. But let's talk about Fletch to start. I know y'all want to talk about Back to the Future, and of course we're going to talk about it. But Fletch, to me, I remember. Again, I'll give you my history lesson on Fletch, and then I'll talk to y'all about yours, where you first saw the film, whether it was in theaters or afterward. I was at a Goodwill in Houston, of all places. And when you're a happening teen, this is the place that you want to be to find all the members-only jackets that you can at a discounted rate. And I remember they had the VHS rack. And my grandmother still had her Magnavox television set that had an accompanying VHS player, a VCR. And one of the VHS tapes was this blue cover, paper cover, with Chevy Chase, who I loved growing up watching Christmas Vacation and all those movies. And it had him in different uniforms. And I'm like, what is this Fletch? I don't understand what this is. But I bought the movie anyway for $1.75. I just want everyone to know. I remember the price. And I went home and watched it. And I said, this is one of the greatest movies ever made. How could I be at this point in my life and not have seen this? This is peak Chevy, Jim, right? I mean, this is the biggest he really ever got. This was really the most Chevy we ever got, maybe I should say.
Right. And I think by his own account, I mean, he said it many times, it's his favorite movie. It's the movie I think he was truly able to be himself, be his funniest. And I think it shows, it certainly is the peak of his career, to us at least.
And to me, Jake, this was a movie that I guess if you were, in the 80s, everybody knew Fletch, but it doesn't have the same, I guess maybe because it had just the one sequel, but it doesn't have the same, I don't know, maybe large fan base in a movie like a Back to the Future or Indiana Jones, one of those big tentpole films. It's a much smaller film
it is.
in story, but still, I mean, it's one of the best Chevy ones that we ever got.
Yeah, and I think it still resonates, again, like I mentioned earlier, just because, again, it's so watchable. And then as Jim mentioned before, it's just so quotable. And the fact that we're, 3+ decades removed from it, and the fact that, at least with guys, with the exception of you, which I think is great that you're in your 20s, but, 30s, 40s, when you hear ball bearings, it's almost immediate that that's what you think of. So I think that goes a lot to the writing. And yeah, it's a shame that the franchise didn't become more than it really had the potential to be. And, I know we'll talk about this, but hopefully now with the new movie coming out, we can maybe start to see that potential, because a lot of people didn't even know that when Fletch came out, that there was a whole series of books. And we talk a lot about the books as well. And it's nice that, we're going back to the book, which I think made the original so special, was because the source material was just so good. And the fact that we're going back to that for the new one, hopefully we can not only bring new fans to the old movies and to the books, but, maybe try to establish some new ones. So,
and the thing is too, Bob, going off of what Jake said, the source material was so great for especially the first Fletch movie. If you read the novel, the Gregory McDonald novel, the original one, I mean, it is very to the letter, for the most part, the story of the Stanwyck mystery, right? I mean, to me,
well, you're asking the wrong guy about the novel.
I know you're you're the big guy. Yeah, you're the book guy. Yeah, you're the book guy.
No. Jake's the book guy.
You're the book. Okay, Jake's the book.
I'm the anti-book guy. I'm the guy that hasn't read any of the books. Jake's the one that discovered Fletch via the books, and Jake is, and I'm not trying to toot Jake's horn, but Jake is by far the other than Gregory McDonald and his son, I think he's the foremost Fletch book expert. Jake, would you accept that title?
Yeah, I would absolutely. I don't know if I am. I'll accept it.
At least for our podcast, he is.
Sure.
So yeah, if you want to know anything about, tying it, Jake discovered it via the books, and yeah, he's the guy to ask about the books. Me, I discovered it just we talked about this on our podcast before, but not so different than your story. You discovered it later in life. Can't imagine how the hell you didn't know about this sooner. I hope you don't mind if I swear.
Go for it.
God damn it, Bob, swear.
Thank you. So yeah, Laker Jim and I had a mutual friend that was a Dallas Cowboy and more importantly, a Los Angeles Laker fan. And, he couldn't believe that we never had seen Fletch. This was, in the 90s. I'm not sure how far into the 90s, not too far into the 90s. Couldn't believe that we had never seen Fletch. And we discovered it because it was recommended, by a friend of ours. And yeah, we should have seen it when we were a lot younger, but we didn't. So yeah, we have a similar story to you. But yeah, as far as the books go, your fellow Texan there is the guy to kind of talk about the books with there, Jake. He is our Jake. Go ahead.
So I mean, but yeah, Round Rock, Texas's own Jake over here. Let's talk about the source material of the first one. It's although it doesn't have the Chevy-isms, the original novel, because I mean I've read I think almost all of the Fletch books at this point. The first one, though, is very story-wise the Alan Stanwyck of it all, right? It's not like they just took the title and ran with it.
Yeah, I think the only thing that really differs is the ending, because the ending of the book is completely different than how the movie ended, because then there's an offshoot, with all the sequels kind of build on how the original novel finished and how Fletch has this money and how he picked up Stanwyck's money at the end of the movie and how it just kind of followed him through the rest of the novels. And that's basically how he lived. But yes, you're exactly right. For the most part, it definitely fits that.
Now, Laker Jim, I have to get past the first part of your name, obviously being a Rockets fan, near and dear. And what your franchise has been doing as of late is highly questionable. But nevertheless, let's talk about Fletch, because you once you discovered this film, you kind of dove all the way in, if memory serves me correct. You were all Fletch all the time, early on in the fan sites and the message boards. And do I have it right? Did you interview Gregory McDonald at one point?
No, actually, Jake is the one that did.
Jake
and that's
did.
kind of how I got in touch with Jake. Yeah, early on in the internet, when websites there were probably so few you could hit them all. I decided I wanted to learn how to make websites. And I was a creative guy, and it was just an outlet for me to be creative. So I thought, okay, I'm going to create two passions of mine. I'm going to make a website about Kurt Rambis of the Lakers, who was sort of a fan favorite in the 80s. And I'm going to do a website about Fletch. And at the time, they were the only two websites on those topics. And I just thought to myself, like, if I was a Fletch fan, what would I be looking for on the other end? So I just tried to delve into creative ways to look at different scenes and different topics, and tried to kind of create news and information and new things for Fletch fans. And
yeah, if I can interrupt, this is before like IMDb and Wikipedia had that kind of information readily available at your hand. But go on, I'm sorry.
Right. So, as more and more Fletch fans started to come out of the woodwork, Jake was one of them. And he would always write to me and say, hey, I kind of know Gregory McDonald. If you want me to interview him for you, I'd love to do it. Hey, if you have a book, send it to me. I'll get it autographed. And to me, it was awesome that we had so many Fletch fans that just were willing to contribute to the website for nothing. And it sort of was just a labor of love. I didn't make any money from it. And then the Kevin Smith Fletch One news kind of popped up.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like the perfect avenue for my website to take off and follow the Kevin Smith Fletch One news. But then, as we kind of all know what happened with that, as that fizzled, and I started to, I went on to college and I started to have less and less time, the website died a little bit. And to make a long story short, too late. I said to myself, like, what, this really should be a podcast. In today's world, Fletch should be a podcast. So I didn't have time to make a podcast. So what I did is I started an Instagram page. And out of the woodwork came all the old people from 20 something years ago.
Wow.
And Jake was one of them. Bob was somebody I grew up with. So he was the guy I watched Fletch with every day. We had sleepovers, we had whatever. I mean, just whatever we were doing.
Oh, it was Fletch Clue or Big Trouble in Little China or Back to the
all
Future.
of our favorite
course.
movies.
One of those four. Major League, one of those five.
Oh, Major League.
Yeah. And it's just like, I mean, that's how the dialogue just sunk into our heads, just watching it over and over and over.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, like, okay, all these people just came back into my life. Now it's time for a podcast. And I thought to myself, Jake is the perfect person with his expertise in the books. I reached out to him and said, Jake, I got a crazy idea. What do you think about a Fletch podcast? And he was like, dude, that would be incredible. You should do it. I'm like, well, I kind of only want to do it if you're involved. And he goes, okay. Then Jake and I had never spoke on the phone before ever.
So
Never.
this is all email or?
All email.
Yeah.
So we talked for the first time and we just kind of clicked. And then I called Bob and I was like, hey, just talk to Jake. He's like one of us. He would fit in good with us. And so we were like, okay, let's start to brainstorm some ideas. And just like the website where I kind of just generated topics and generated news, that's sort of like what we do on the podcast. And we all just clicked. Our chemistry was great. And the podcast has been doing great. So Laker Jim's Fletchcast is, it's what started as a website and then went to social media and evolved into a podcast. And God knows what else in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's great timing. Of course, we're going to be talking about Confess Fletch when we get into this a little bit more. Well, so I guess, Jake, how did you know Gregory McDonald? How did you have a connection to him?
When I started reading the books, I was working at a station in Alabama, and I was talking with one of the assignment editor actually in the newsroom one day, and I was telling him that I was reading the book, and he knew that McDonald lived near Huntsville, where I was living, and he gave me a contact at a local library near McDonald's house, thinking that they knew how to get in touch with him, and so I wanted to do a story on him. And so, I contacted the library. The library got in contact with him, and then McDonald called me. Greg called me, and we went up to his farm in Tennessee and did a story on him. And
what year was this, Jake?
This was 2000. This was like 2000, 2001. So it's been 20 years. And we hit it off, and we become fast friends. And I was friends with him, and his wife Cheryl was great, and she's great. And we were friends for years, right up to when he passed in 2008.
Wow, man. I mean, and to me, that's just it's always fun to meet somebody who you're really a big fan of or love their art, their work. But it's another thing when that relationship continues past the interview. I'm sure working in television, Jake, I mean, you're very good friends on the camera or when the story's going on, and then you get off and you're like, oh yeah, I haven't heard from that guy in 10 years or 5 years or whatever it is. To keep that connection was pretty awesome. So when you had to interview him, did you say, okay, I'm only going to talk to him about the novels, or the movie had to be part of the conversation? But
it was. And I have I'll send you the link. I found the story. It was on one of my old VHS resume tapes. I found the story, and I recorded it, and I uploaded it to YouTube. I'll send you the link so you can actually watch it. But it was both. It was both because it was the story incorporated, of course, the books, the old movie. And at the time, as Jim mentioned, it was when all the rumblings were beginning with the new Kevin Smith movie. So there was a lot of that was in it as well. So it was a little bit of everything. But yeah, he was great. He was a great guy. He was so generous with his time. He was always so great to us as far as autographs and like interviews. And he would always give us Fletch One updates, and I would pass them on to Jim, and we would post them on the website. So it's a shame that he didn't get it to see Fletch One come to fruition or to Confess Fletch. But we are still in very close contact with the family, with Jason McDonald, his son. And I know they're all very excited about the movie, and they've already seen it and are very happy with how it turned out. And we're happy we talked with Greg Mottola, the director, and And we have a close relationship with him, and he's been very kind to us too as the movie, is prepping to be released.
Yeah, y'all find a way to get in with the people who are the movers and the shakers and the power players. Let's talk about Fletch, though, going to Chevy. So I don't know. I know a lot about Back to the Future. Obviously, I know a lot about Clue. I don't know as much about the background of Fletch, although it's one of my favorite movies ever. What's the genesis? Was Chevy always attached to be Fletch, or did they have to go through a long list of different people?
LJ knows all about that.
Yeah, well, the one thing that Gregory McDonald actually had control over who played Fletch. Right. Thing in film. He had last say in who they cast as Fletch. So there are some famous rumblings, famous people that have been in the running, and it's a long, long story. The fact that Fletch got made is a miracle. Peter Douglas, Michael Douglas's brother, he was relentless to make sure Fletch got made. He read the book and he said, this has to be made. The rights passed on from one company to the next. Mick Jagger was connected to it, Billy Idol,
David Bowie.
There were so many people
Kurt Reynolds,
at some point. And Gregory McDonald shot them all down. When Chevy was sort of brought up, it was somebody that he was somewhat interested in. He hadn't seen much of Saturday Night Live, and if you read the book, Chevy is really not Fletch in the book. Fletch is blonde. Fletch is young, in his 20s. So Chevy really didn't fit the mold for the character from the book. But for some reason, Gregory McDonald did not throw a wrench in that one, and it worked out amazingly.
Now, knowing Chevy as a Chevy fan, I can't imagine that he stuck to the script word for word, as any comic would, right? I mean, some of these great bits are all, improvised. But certain directors, and especially if Gregory McDonald had such a strong influence on the movie itself, Bob, I would think that he probably wouldn't have been a fan of a lot of improvisation. But what do you know about the filming process with Chevy, Bob?
Well, I know that the original Fletch, Liquor Jim and Jake have both had their hands with, of course, their hands covered in rubber gloves. They've had their hands all over the Fletch script over the years, and they honestly have spoken about it in the past, and they could probably tell you best how much of it is improvised. I know that Fletch Lives is, God, you're a Fletch Lives fan from what I understand, just like I am. Fletch Lives was a movie that really went through so many different variations of a script, and it was changed and then redone and rechanged to the point where the majority of the movie is ad-libbed when it comes to Fletch Lives. A lot of the lines were, that the whole scene in the original Fletch movie in the airport hangar was, what did we say originally, guys? When was that decided?
Michael Ritchie, we interviewed Tim Matheson. And Tim Matheson said Michael Ritchie was by far the perfect guy to direct Fletch, because
Tim Matheson, of course, playing Alan Stanwyck for those that are not diehards like us.
Right, because he was able to control Chevy. He said Chevy would come in with these wild ideas and wild lines and things like that. And he would say, okay, we can do that. But first, we're going to do it by the script.
Yeah, by the book, right.
Then we'll let you do your improv version of the scene. So he always had both. He both had to buy the script and the Chevy thing, and a lot of the Chevy improvs got in there, which is great. And Fletch Lives, what Bob mentioned, was during a writer's strike. That was during the longest writer's strike in the history of the Writers Guild. So they had nobody to rewrite during the filming. So Michael Ritchie was trying to rewrite it. Chevy was trying to rewrite it. They were improvising a lot of the stuff on their own. And they also had a different writer than the first Fletch. Andrew Bergman wrote the first script for the original Fletch. And then they had a different guy writing Fletch Lives. So it was honestly a mess. We love Fletch Lives. We really do.
Okay. Thank the Lord. Because I don't think we could have a conversation if y'all didn't like Fletch Lives. But continue.
We do. So, it could have been a lot different. I think it could have been a lot better, but we still love it. There's so many great lines in Fletch Lives. It didn't age all that well. There's a lot of things that are a little cringeworthy in it by today's standards, but we still love it. And we honestly, we honor both movies on our podcast. We honor the books. We do everything we can to celebrate Fletch and Fletch.
Yeah, to live it. Now, Brad, from what I understand, you're a big wrestling fan, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you know the whole story about the movie No Holds Barred and how I'm sure you've heard, Bruce Pritchard or whoever talk about how Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan locked themselves in a hotel room for a weekend and wrote the whole script in one weekend. And, have you heard that story before?
Absolutely. I'm nodding, but yes, absolutely. Okay.
So I'm not saying that Fletch Lives is the same kind of degree of, they wrote it in a weekend kind of deal. But yeah, as far as, to answer your question that you originally asked me, as far as the deviation from what was written in the actual script itself, there's some, more so in Fletch Lives, though. It follows that no holds barred, plan of, let Chevy do his own thing, get out of his way, and let's get this movie in the can.
So the other thing that I love about Fletch, other than Chevy, and again, we could go on all day about the one-liners and the great lines from the movie. I mean, my wife is a real estate agent, and I can't tell you how many times, rent with an option to buy has come up in our daily communication. Or what's your address? 7. But let's talk about the music, because the music of Fletch is so great. And again, it's got the classic 80s Beverly Hills Cop vibe. But what
Harry Faltermeyer?
Yeah, same guy, right? So what do we know? How did the score come to be? Because it's really, even if you don't know Fletch, I'm sure you've heard the theme somewhere. I think it's the Axel F of its day for sure.
We've done 2 episodes that go back to 2 things you brought up. We've done a full episode where we did almost a March Madness bracket of the best Fletch quotes, but we also did an episode about the music of Fletch, and that's a great one to go back to. It's in our archives. You can listen to all the time, all the different songs that were on the thing. But yeah, the soundtrack itself. Who was Laker Jim? Do you recall, or Jake? Do you recall who the who actually put the soundtrack out? Was it?
Well,
Universal.
The soundtrack, again,
I think it was Warner Brothers.
Yeah, just like Fletch,
Warner Brothers,
just like the movie, the soundtrack has its own drama too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Tom Scott was originally hired to do the score for Fletch. Okay.
Right.
Tom Scott, if anyone doesn't know, he was one of the original Blues Brothers in the Blues Brothers band. He was Chevy's band leader on the Chevy Chase show. He was hired to do the score for Fletch. The movie was wrapped. He hands over the score. They hated the score. Hated it. They were in a panic. They reach out to Harold Faltermeyer and say, listen, we got this movie coming out. Can you put something together? In almost like a week or weekend, he whips up the theme, the score, everything, hands it over to them, and it became the score of Fletch. Now, one thing that I'm not sure a lot of people know is that he also wrote the theme to Top Gun.
Right.
The theme to Top Gun was originally supposed to be the song in the Laker Chevy Dream when he plays basketball with Kareem. That dun, dun, dun,
the Chikaren scene, yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. That was he wrote that to be in the Fletch scene long before Top Gun existed. So, or no, he had been hired for Top Gun, but he was working on Fletch, and it was I think, was it Billy Idol?
Billy Idol, yeah, it was Billy Idol who heard it.
He was in a studio in England working on the Fletch soundtrack, and Billy Idol popped. Then he was listening to that song and said, "You know what? That should be your Top Gun theme, not this Fletch theme." And he says, "Yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I think that would fit better." So he's like, so then I just did this little, score for the Fletch basketball scene.
That was great.
That song became, the song you think of when you think of Top Gun.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the drama continues today. We've been debating for months now. Are we going to get the original Fletch theme, the Harry Faltermeyer theme, in the new Confessed Fletch movie? And we still don't know, but we are very hopeful that that'll be an addition.
For all the people we know, for all the doors we've knocked on, all the people that speak to us, That is the one tight-lipped thing that no one will tell.
We can't get an
They're
answer.
very secret. Yeah.
We talk to people that know, and they will not tell us. So we're kind of thinking
it is. Yeah. Don't you think?
Yeah. If they're not telling us, it might be in there.
I don't know how I feel about it though. You know, I mean, I feel like it would be weird without it. But from what I've read, and we can talk a little bit about Confess Fletch, but from what I've read and heard from y'all's show and anything I've been able to read, this isn't the Chevy Chase Fletch. It's not the same tone. There's a comedic tone, but it's not Chevy. This is the John Hamm iteration. Do you think that it would be a misstep to have the music in there?
No.
Really? I think
that
it might.
It would be one of the. I think that he's not going to be doing costumes and characters the way Chevy would do Peter Lemongello or Baba Rum or
John Cox
Claude Henry Smoot. He's not doing that from what we understand. So there are so few little Easter egg kind of, throwback kind of nods to the original movies that they are going to do, that would be one of the ones that I think is acceptable to do. You throw that music in there and that's like, okay, you know what? It's not Chevy. It's not Chevy's version. It's the book version of the character, but you know what? Hey, the one thing that ties all the movies together in the whole universe of Fletch is that music. I think it's essential to have it.
And you see, if you look at some of the production photos, and we were lucky to get our hands on an early look at the trailer about 6 weeks ago or something like that. It didn't have audio, but we did have visual, and there are already a few callbacks. The obvious one is that he's wearing a Laker hat, and nowhere in the books did they ever talk about him being a Laker fan.
Fletch,
so obviously that's a callback to the movie. So I think if there's a version of it, it might not be the exact version, but if there's a version of it, I think I would be fine with it, because Jim had mentioned something that I think really made a lot of sense, is that it's so tied to the movie that people be like, oh look, there's a new Fletch movie out, and I think that really makes sense to me.
It's almost like his Bond theme, So the Bond actors have changed, but the theme remains the same,
right?
And I think that's a great analogy. I think that's the bridge that might narrow the gap between the fans of the Fletch movies that might be like, it's not Chevy, I'm not interested. Maybe once they hear that theme, you just get into the Fletch mood. You know what I mean? Like, takes you back.
We've wondered if maybe the reason that we saw the trailer without any sound at all is because the Fletch theme might be playing over the trailer itself, and they didn't want to give that away. But again, that's just speculation on our part. We really don't know.
But we can say that the trailer will be out very soon.
Right.
Yep. Very, very soon. So maybe we'll
probably
have some
by the time this drops, we'll
probably.
Man,
definitely.
Well, here's the thing, and I guess Jake, you'd be the guy to talk to about this. Confess Fletch is my favorite of the novels.
Yeah, it's up there for me too.
It's my favorite one. I love how the story ties together. And again, I've purposefully stayed as spoiler free on this movie as possible. I actually don't want to know a whole lot about it. I want to just sit and watch it when it comes out and be surprised. But one thing I have heard, and you can confirm, is one of the key characters in Confess Fletch, the book, is Inspector Flynn, who is just this wonderful character in the book. So much so they even gave him a spin-off series of books.
Correct.
Gregory McDonald being they. Flynn isn't in this movie, though. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Come on,
Flynn
how do we do this?
I think the thinking is, in fact, I know the thinking is that there is, I think, discussions, considerations of his own type of franchise. And I think that they did not, although in one camp you would think, wow, maybe you should introduce him if a franchise is planned to kind of spin him off into his own franchise. And then the other side is like, well, we don't want it maybe to be a distraction. We kind of just, especially with Fletch coming back, that maybe we should just focus on Fletch. But I agree. I think Flynn is a huge part of the book. He's a great character, and the novels that feature him are wonderful as well. But it'll be kind of interesting to see the movie without knowing that Flynn's in it.
So and if we know, how big of a departure is it from the source material this way? I mean, do we have the Countess de Grassi? Do we have...
Yes. The Countess is in there. The Countess is definitely in there. Marcia Gay Harden has talked about it, and we've seen stills with her in it.
And she's in the trailer.
And she's in the trailer too, right? Mm-hmm. So the Countess is in it. We know Andy is in it. She's, plays the girlfriend, fiance.
Mm-hmm.
So I know some of the big characters, and we know Haran is in it, the art dealer. We know he is in it as well. So some of the other key characters are definitely there.
Okay, interesting. They didn't do Flynn. You said you did an NCAA style March Madness breakdown of the greatest Fletch quotes ever. What made it into the Final Four?
I worked tirelessly on that bracket.
What was the Final Four?
Well, let me ask you, what do you think the final?
Oh, good question.
To me?
Yes. What would you think?
Well, obviously ball bearings is in there.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of what my favorite ones are, but I'm not trying to put me into it. I don't know if, and I charged it.
Putting you into it is what we need.
I charged it all to the Underhill's credit card. You want the number? I don't know if that made it, but I'm sure that was on the list somewhere. Maybe.
Oh, it was. Yeah.
Okay. What was number one though? I don't know. You got to tell me. What were the top four?
What we judged it based on a lot of criteria. We judged it on iconicness, witty it is in the movie, how quotable it is. So we had all different types of criteria, and pitting them against each other, they're all our favorite lines, was tough. And so
really comes down to usage and when you need them, which line you need in the right situation.
Yeah.
No, never, never,
And sometimes you just get a bad matchup. Sometimes a great
it was
right. Bad matchup against a Titan. And what it ultimately came down to was the Moon River quote versus It's All Ball Bearings. And then so what we did was, we blacked out during this just 2-part episode. I don't even remember what was happening, but we put it in the hands of the fans. So we said, okay, here are the 2 quotes we've come down to. It's up to you guys to vote what the greatest Fletch quote of all time is.
It was definitely a spirited debate because there's 3 of us deciding on 32 quotes, and we had a lot of arguments. A lot of things were said in anger. We've since moved on from there, but yeah, ultimately it wasn't fair, or it wasn't the right decision for us to decide. It really did have to come down. That's why I said a moment ago, who do you think and what would you say? Because it doesn't matter necessarily what the 3 of us think as much as what the world thinks or what the world of Fletch fans think. And do we want to say who the winner was, or do we want to force people to go back and listen?
It's got to be ball bearings
anyway. It's all ball bearings.
It is all bearings.
It was close though.
It was close.
And let me tell you, the people that voted Moon River were not happy about the ball bearings.
No,
but in the end,
real division. Real division in the world of Fletch.
I think the right quote won in the end.
Yeah,
and we'll see next year when we do it all again. Who comes out on top?
What was the
next year? We do a Fletch Lives version of it.
Yes. Yeah, Fletch Lives for sure.
Oh man. Well, which was your individual? Out of the 3 of you, what was the one that y'all were championing that didn't make it to the Final Four? Did y'all have one that you were like, man, this is my favorite Fletch quote?
Jake was pushing hard for John Cocktoson.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
That's right. Yeah, I can't remember what the one I was. Do you remember what I was pushing hard for that I was upset about?
I don't really, but we loved all the quotes, and it was really tough to do. It's tougher than
it's harder than you think. It really is harder than you think to it's like a Sophie's choice in a lot of cases where you have to let something you really love go. Yeah.
What was it, Fletch or Fletch Lives, where he makes the in and out joke?
It was all Fletch quotes. Only
that was Fletch Lives.
Only Chevy. Yeah. Only. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking about this. I was good. Well, just to say though, this whole tournament was just specific Chevy Chase Fletch quotes. No other side characters. Just from the original movie.
Man, I got to go back. I got to go back and check that one out. I want to talk Back to the Future with you all in just a second.
We want to talk Back to the Future with you.
I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about it because, again, the 85 trilogy is strong. I had my reservations about John Hamm. Okay. I had my reservations. I said, hey, Draper, I mean, is this the guy? There were some obvious ones, right? Like, I know for a long time, what's his name was attached from Saturday Night Live.
Well, Sudeikis was there.
Jason
for a while.
Sudeikis. Jason
Yeah.
Sudeikis.
Jason Lee,
Yeah.
Jason
That was the
Sudeikis.
last
There's been
one.
a lot of different people.
Zach Braff.
I mean, to
Ryan
me,
Reynolds.
Ryan Reynolds was a very obvious.
Jason Lee.
Ryan
Jason
Reynolds
Lee
was a
there
very
for-
obvious choice, but I guess Chevy. When you think of Fletch, it's such a hard one to cast because you need somebody who's A, can deliver the comedy, B, has the timing to get the kind of one-line jokes in under the radar, but also has to be a handsome son of a gun, right? Because
but consider this too. It's not Chevy. It's Fletch. You know, and
I know
that's the main point to consider as well. Is you don't want to have a Chevy clone doing the role. You want to have somebody that's going to do the book version, playing this character now.
And Ryan Reynolds, he was offered the role. He turned it down, and
He would have been perfect.
He kind of came out and said, "Listen, those are shoes I can't fill, and those are shoes I don't want to go near." So everyone's like, "Oh, they should have picked him. They should have picked him." He didn't want it. You know, he's actually turned the role down. And John Hamm wasn't on our radar either. We started to get used to the idea of Sudeikis, and then that movie company went under. That went bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
So we really thought that was the end. I mean, at least for a while. And then when this popped up, and you know what? The more and more we listen to interviews by John Hamm, he's a huge Fletch fan, just like you guys. He found Fletch in the books first, and he was a fan of the books, and he's a huge fan of the movie. I think he's going to pay this role a tremendous amount of respect. I think he respects the Chevy Chase version. He respects the fans of the Chevy Chase version. And from all accounts that we've heard, he kills it in this role. So we're hopeful.
What I was going to say though is, yes, I had my reservations about him, but then I was on a plane to LA, and you know they always show the most random films on there, so I'm like going through the United Rolodex of potential movies I can watch, and I think the movies on an airplane is like the ultimate database of movies I want to watch, just not right now.
Yeah,
you know,
it's like came out of the movie theater, they're not quite out.
Yeah, it's like I'll watch that, but not now. But this movie Tag came up.
Okay.
Yeah, he's really good in that. He's
And I
really
watched
funny.
Tag, and that's exactly, Jake, what stuck out to me. I'm like, you know what? He was really funny in this movie, and it turned me around on him.
Yeah, and he was on a couple episodes of Curb. I don't know if you watched Curb. Yeah, he was great in Curb. And, you know, I think what they were saying earlier, you know, he seems to have a real allegiance to the books and to the character. And I think that if given the chance, we could see him in this character. I mean, he wants to do this character for a long, long time. And yeah, as LJ said, everything we've heard, he kills it. So I think we should be good.
Roy Wood Jr., he is the comedian Roy Wood Jr., he's going to kind of be taking on the Flynn role in this movie. So they've kind of created a cop
kind of generic kind of detective
that's going to fill in for Flynn. He said that Ham kills it. And he's like, you know what? I'm always the one that needs to be funny. For the first time ever, I just sat back and let John Hamm be funny. He's like, he killed it. So to me, I look at that and I look at a comedian's angle of watching John Hamm be funny, and I don't know, just all the signs point to this is going to be a good choice, and we're just we got our fingers crossed.
In the trailer that we saw too, even though it did not have the sound like we mentioned before, just the expressions that we see from him and the situations that he's in and his reaction to those situations, it looks really funny.
I mean, it's saying a lot. I'm excited for it. Confess Fletch is around the corner. I mean, it's going to be crazy to be able to watch a Fletch movie in 2022. Before we get to Back to the Future, last thing. I showed Fletch to my wife maybe like a year or two ago. We watched it. She loved it. Had never seen it before. Thought it was hilarious. Put it on her list of like recommended movies. She would recommend movies to people, and she's like, "You got to see Fletch." Okay,
stick with her.
Yes, that's why I had to put a ring on it. I'm like, wait a minute, you like Back to the Future and Fletch? But then I showed her Fletch Lives. Not a fan. Like within the first 2 minutes, she was like, "No, this is nowhere near the quality of the first movie." Like
really?
Within
where's the disconnect?
He's not even out of the maid costume yet, and she was already out on the movie. Like I'm not joking. Already.
I don't get that.
Yeah. And I actually like the opening of Fletch Lives a lot.
Peggy Lee Zorpa. Yeah, I mean, like.
Right. Why does that one not connect as much as the first one? Because I know there's always the sophomore slump, right? The sequel is never as good as the original, or rarely is it as good or better.
Some people are just automatically gonna despise sequels, whether it's Caddyshack 2, Major League, Fletch.
Caddyshack 2 is not a point in your favor.
Yeah, really.
I ain't gonna fucking sit here and gonna listen to people bash Caddyshack 2. I love Caddyshack 2.
The best thing about Caddyshack 2 was the Kenny Loggins song. That was it.
I don't want to hear it.
And the Chevy part.
You're right. You're right. The Chevy scene is pretty funny when he was in the locker room.
Yeah,
Jim and I talk about that a lot. That is a funny scene.
Major League 2, I'm on board with you though.
I love Caddyshack 2. I love Chandler Young, and I love Randy Quaid. I'm not going to sit here and debate Caddyshack 2.
Yeah, I know you're a big fan too of
Rumble.
You're a big fan too of Christmas Vacation 2, Cousin Eileen's Island Adventure,
Cousin
right?
Eileen's when he's on the island.
That was rough. Anyway, but anyway, some people are automatically going to just turn around and say, a sequel is not as good as the original, and we all know that's not true because there's so many sequels. Empire Strikes Back, Godfather 2. There's so many movies that have great sequels. So
Back to the Future 2.
Back to the Future 2, arguably,
Back
yes.
to the Future 2. Mm-hmm. So there's some people that are just that way, and those are the same people that aren't going to watch Confess Fletch because they're going to automatically just not give it a chance. But I think the disconnect is that Fletch, the original Fletch movie, just opens and just puts the pedal to the metal, and there's not a dull moment in the movie. I think sometimes some of Fletch Lives does have a little bit of, a lull to the movie to the point where, it kind of like doesn't pace well, I don't know. I personally love it, so I'm not the guy to ask.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
I think Fletch is a different character in Fletch Lives. He's slightly cruder. There's a goofier side to him. There's more disguises. There's more of that. He becomes more of a, becomes more of a sort of like a circus clown than in the first movie. He's just a regular guy, a regular cool guy. You look at him and you like, damn, I want to be like Fletch. I want to be as cool as him, confident, funny, everything that Fletch is in the first movie. In the second movie, it's definitely a goofier version of him. But I think if you love the first movie, there's a place in your heart for Fletch Lives. I think the movie being set in the South lends itself to a lot of the, outdated cultural
stereotypes
and things like that don't really play anymore. But in the 80s, Back to the Future has it. Back to 1955, there were definitely some things that are said in that movie that wouldn't fly today. I think overall, it's like
I think it's going back to the source material too, LJ, like we talked about too.
Oh, good point. That's a really good point.
I mean, like it's not based on a novel.
And
at one time they were going to do Fletch and the Man Who, which is a great book.
It is a really good one.
You've read it. It's a really good book. But
that's the one about the presidential campaign, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. When he was the press secretary. So I think that's part of it too. It's just that the source isn't there like it was in the original too. But I agree. I think there's some funny stuff in it. It is definitely goofier, broader comedy. It really there are some funny scenes in that.
No, there's a lot, and you know what, the Southern connection, I guess, made me like it a little bit more. I mean, I know people, like Jimmy Lee Farnsworth, like you grow up with them on your television,
sure,
like you can't escape them. They're all over the place. So maybe that's why I like it a little bit more. Let's talk a little Back to the Future. This is Back to the Future, the podcast, of course, and this one is no different than all of them. We have to talk about the greatest time travel story ever told. What's y'all's connection to Back to the Future, other than just being a big fan of it? And I have a very difficult question to give y'all here in just a minute, but what's your origin? We'll start with you, Laker Jim, with Back to the Future.
I mean, Back to the Future it's definitely a top 5 movie of mine of all time.
It used to be your number one for a long time.
It's one of those movies that I quote probably every day. Yeah. I mean, I don't hear a lightning strike, thunder, without saying the storm. My daughter's 4 years.
Sorry, but I gotta say, there was one time Laker Jim and I were walking into a Hobby Lobby and a thunderbolt struck, and he said, "The storm." And I've laughed for 10 minutes straight because I've never heard him say that. It's such a great quote.
My daughter is 4 years old. The last time we heard a thunder strike, she turned to me and said, "The storm." She's never seen Back to the Future. I already got her quoting the movie. You know, I mean, there's just so many. Anytime somebody makes a great point, I say, "That's true, Marty." And, you know, I say, damn, all the time when something, you know, bad happens. You know, he's an idiot, comes from upbringing.
Oh, my favorite quote of the movie.
I mean, I could go on and on with the quotes that I can work into every day of my life, and I do that. So it's a favorite movie of mine. I'm a big autograph collector and memorabilia collector. So I have a lot of signed Back to the Future stuff. I have a full-size poster signed by the cast.
Wow.
And hoverboards and all kinds of stuff. So Back to the Future is a favorite of mine. The only actor I don't have on my poster and probably would never get to sign, would never allow to sign anything is Crispin Glover.
Crispin Glover.
Yes. Mm-hmm. He's so wacky that he kind of purposely ruins Back to the Future items when he signs them.
Thomas F. Wilson used to be that way too, right?
He was not a fan for a while.
Yeah, Biff for a long time would not sign Back to the Future stuff. And then all of a sudden he's starting to, well, I think he
kind of embraced it.
I think he sees all the money people are making at these Comic-Cons and that, and he jumped on board pretty quickly.
Yeah, he just had like a big eBay auction recently of all his own personal Back to the Future
I missed it.
items. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
and his was the copy. No, they went so skyrocket. I mean, for like a lanyard from Back to the Future that he had on his, I don't even remember what it was, or a keychain or something from the set. It went for like $1,000, you know, just for a keychain. And I think his was it was his copy of the film that recently sold for that $30,000 or whatever it was. The sealed VHS copy was his copy, and
I've heard about that.
Yeah, it sold for like $30,000 or whatever it was. What about Bob? I mean, it sounds like that you're right there with Laker Jim as far as your origin and love for the film.
Yeah, you know, my story is not too spectacular, but I mean, yeah, as a kid growing up, I had an older sister. She's 4 years older, my sister Jen, and she was probably the one day we're probably sitting on the couch watching HBO. My parents were big on having all the cable channels, and yeah, I'm pretty sure she was the first person to show me the original movie. And when we were growing up, we would do an annual, well, every 2 years or so, we'd go to Disney World. And when Universal Studios opened, I remember we had seen, by that point, it was 1991 or 2, and we had seen all the movies. They'd all come out by then. And the ride itself, I can go on for 30 minutes here on the ride itself. Have you ever been to Universal Studios?
I never got to ride the ride.
Okay. I'm going to send you a video. It's about a 30-minute video. The ride itself, it used to have a long line because it was one park at the time. And you know, a lot of people were showing up for the first couple of years of being open. So you would stand on line for a good 30 minutes or so. They had all these CRT monitors hanging from the ceiling, you know, 10, 15, 20 monitors hanging while you're standing in line. And they played a video that was a story, just a basic story of 1955 Biff breaking into Doc Brown's Institute of Future Technology that he created. That was the premise of the ride. And Biff stole a time machine, and you had to go and chase Biff down different parts of time and bump him with your time machine and send him back to the future. By doing so, it would kind of spark enough energy to bump him back to the future. Anyway, watching the movie while we were exhausted from a hot day in Universal Studios, Florida, Orlando, watching the movie on those monitors was something that, again, I'll send it to you, 30 minutes of your time to watch it. It's almost like watching the fourth Back to the Future movie because it actually includes the ride too in the video. It's worth it. So yeah, I think the family connection of you know, my sister watching it got me into it. And like Fletch lives, and like I mentioned, I'm a sequel guy. Back to the Future 2 is my favorite of the three.
Oh wow.
So.
Okay, I was going to get to that here in a moment. Let me hear from Jake about his origin story with Back to the Future.
It made a big impression on me. You know, I was 10 years old. It was the first movie I saw at a drive-in back in.
Wow. At a drive-in?
I saw it at a drive-in. In
Phenomenal.
Did you sit in park?
Virginia. What I did? Well, I was with my aunt, so I don't. You know.
So did you sit in park? Sorry.
And
he wasn't in Texas yet.
Exactly. So it made a big impression on me. I loved it, and I remember I got the jacket, the same exact jacket that Marty had, the different kind of colored blue jean. No, it was like a denim jacket or something like that. That he wore
right
under the vest.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, I love it. I still love it to this day. I read the comics. Remember when they had the comics out there for a while? I read the comics. When they had the spinoffs, I read those. I was just a big fan.
Yeah, I mean,
loved him.
Kids today have YouTube influencers and things like that. To us, these 80s movies were our influencers.
Oh,
I
huge.
saw the karate. I walked out of the Karate Kid. I told my mom I want to take karate.
Yeah.
I walked out of Back to the Future. I wanted to learn how to skateboard.
Yep.
I had the Back to the Future skateboard.
Involved a lot of practice that I wasn't willing to do, but I wanted to be like the characters in the movie, and I think that's why these movies are so meaningful to us, because they've influenced so much in our lives. Just the way we speak, the things we do, the way we act, the way we want to act. We all want to be these characters from these movies.
Yeah, and I think we all still want to be Fletch, because we still, like we said, we want that confidence, we want that wittiness. So I think even to this day, I know the three of us are, they're still very impressed by him.
Yeah, Laker Jim, you hit it with the my favorite quote from Back to the Future is, "He's an idiot. It comes from upbringing. His parents are probably idiots too." I can't tell you how many times
so funny.
I also moonlight as a pro wrestling commentator, and for the amount of times I've dropped "He's an idiot. It comes from upbringing" on television in the airwaves. That's cool. Is something to behold. You mentioned it here a second ago, Bob. You said the second one's your favorite. Of course, people who listen to this podcast know, the second movie and the third movie were shot at the same time. A lot of people, though, if I had to say what's the Fletch Lives of the Back to the Future trilogy, a lot of people might say Back to the Future 3. But I want to know everyone's rankings here. How do we have them ranked? I'm gonna start with you, Bob, because we know your number one is. How do you have the Back to the Future movies ranked?
Oh, it's definitely 2, 1, 3 for me.
Why is 2 better? Because one is pretty much highly regarded as a perfect movie.
I mean, sure. I'm going to be honest with you. I've seen 1 so many times that I'm not going to say I don't appreciate it, but I don't appreciate it as much as when I originally saw it. And I think I've seen 2 less than I've seen 1. So for me, it's a little more rare. So it's a little more exciting. But the fact that they go into the future and I got to peek into what my life could be, obviously we know some of it
came true.
Some of it did come true. Some of it didn't, But yeah, I thought that the fact that as a kid seeing them go into the future, I never really cared about seeing what my parents' lives were like in the 50s or the Old West. Didn't really do it for me, but seeing the future really just blew me away. And I love the timeline skew story of Biff becoming so powerful. So yeah, I just love part 2 for that reason. I think that it is the Empire Strikes Back of the trilogy, and so many people love Empire most. And yeah,
well, it is a slightly darker version.
It is dark.
I mean, especially when he goes back to the other timeline in '85. I mean,
not slightly darker. I mean, it is grim.
It's dark. I mean, like he sees his dad's grave. I mean, there's a lot of darkness there.
Doc Brown committed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, his mom's depressed with plastic surgery. Go ahead, Dr. Jim.
And a lot of the sequels, the second movies of a trilogy or whatever, had that dark side.
Absolutely.
For some reason, it takes a dark turn before it gets to the
Even
end.
though Temple of Doom was a prequel, it still was the second, and it was much darker.
Sure.
My least favorite of the 4.
Yeah,
and they had that.
I'm a huge Indy fan. I mean, I could talk Indy all day, but I mean, Temple of Doom was so dark that led to the PG-13 rating.
Right.
I mean, it was because of Temple of Doom.
I was terrified as a kid of the heart ripping scene.
Sure, Mola Ram.
I'll be honest with you. I mean, we talked about some of the lines in Fletch and in Back to the Future that doesn't fly today. There's a lot in Temple of Doom that if they tried to do that today, it'd be a no-go. It'd be a no-go.
Well, speaking of ripping your heart out, Brad, I hope this doesn't rip your heart out. But I'm not the biggest fan of part 3. Okay.
I love 3.
And it's not because of the movie itself. I'm just, for some reason, Westerns don't do it for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it gives me a weird feeling that I don't like. And so I hold that against it. And
Laker Jim is a northern elitist. I'm going to be honest.
we could all say
can't hide
that.
it.
And a Lakers fan. It's like he's like
Yeah.
He's all over the place.
The only credibility he has for the South is the fact that he's a Cowboys fan. Otherwise,
that doesn't get credibility in this household. But continue.
So for me, it's 1 and 2, and maybe the very end of 3. That's sort of like how I would rank it to me.
Okay, and then Jake.
I would have to agree with you. I think 1 is definitely can't be touched, but I applaud both the second and the third movie. That I like them almost equally. I mean, I think 2 does take a darker turn, but again, I think it has to be applauded because the storyline is just so good. I really enjoyed. I had to see it twice. I remember I saw it twice in the theater just to get it. So I think there was a lot to it. And then there's such a sweetness to 3 with the Clara character and the Doc Brown, romance. It's just so sweet. And there's a lot of comedy in 3. I think people tend to forget that 3 is pretty funny. There's a lot of funny stuff in 3 too.
And 3 has our transition character between both.
Right. Burton Gilliam's in it. And, there's a lot of those old, and I love Westerns. I'm a huge Western fan. So I really like a lot in 3. There's some really funny stuff. And the fact that he calls himself Clint Eastwood, I mean, that never gets old.
Yeah. And then it's Eastwood Ravine when they go back. What kind of stupid name is that?
Exactly.
Someone just say something about Eastwood Ravine?
Yes.
Yes, in the Eastwood Ravine.
I just discovered that. All right, listen. So I just watched all 3 movies around this past weekend from Saturday to yesterday. And I just had Back to the Future 3 on Sunday, and I was watching, and I never noticed. I know it was originally Clara Clayton Ravine, where the original story went, and I never noticed until I watched.
Oh, I can't believe
that. I know about the Twin Pines and the Lone Pines Mall and everything, but I never noticed that it says Eastwood Crossing when he's on the tracks at the end until this past weekend. So you learn something new every time you watch it.
Yeah, I mean that's actually going back to the rewatchability of the Back to the Future trilogy. There's always something you can pick up on again.
Little Easter eggs.
Even for me, I mean, it was maybe a year ago I was watching, and in the 2015 scene, I saw in the Blast from the Past store window, there's a little Roger Rabbit doll, which is obviously what Robert Zemeckis and Christopher Lloyd. I will say, for the record, for all of you, Christopher Lloyd's favorite Back to the Future film, because I had him on this podcast, and I asked him, what is your favorite Back to the Future film? He said Back to the Future 3.
That doesn't surprise me. He's basically the star of the movie.
And 3 is the most like 1. 3 is the most similar to 1. They're stuck in the past. They don't know how they're going to get back to the future. They got to come up with some kind of creative way to get there. You were going to say
3 is sort of his, 3 is sort of his story.
Yeah.
The first
it totally is. Yeah.
Is Marty's dad's story. The second one is sort of his story, and the third one is Doc's.
Yeah. And Christopher Lloyd's first on-screen kiss was in Back to the Future 3 when he kissed Mary Steenburgen.
And Mary Steenburgen is great in that too.
Yeah.
And she's perfect.
Yes. No. Very, very good. Well, here's the last thing I want to ask y'all about. Of course, Fletch is coming up. They all have the Laker
September
Gyms
16th.
Fletchcast, September 16th. I'm sure y'all going to have a bevy of content coming for everybody who's a Fletch fan. Greg Mottola, who's the director, I'm sure is going to do a deep dive on y'all's podcast. Hopefully, I'm hoping that y'all do a breakdown with him. And again, this movie just seems to have inspired so many other stories. I mean, I had the creator of the show Psych on this program, and Steve Frank said, we were just trying to make Fletch, and we made this show Psych. He said, we're just trying to make Fletch. So they did
a great Clue episode.
They did.
Yeah, they did.
Their 100th episode was a Clue episode with Christopher Lloyd was in that one.
By the way, is this your 100th episode?
Yes, it is. Yes,
How about
it is.
that?
Look at that. Talking about y'all did your research. To know that's the 100th episode, that's pretty incredible. But yes, it is the 100th episode of this podcast. It's crazy.
I think what makes Fletch and all these movies, Clue, it was so perfectly cast. And I know Back to the Future famously was miscast for a while, but they did originally want Michael J. Fox. So I mean, in a way, we did a recasting. I don't know if we've
done the recasting, yeah.
Yeah,
we've done a recasting with Fletch, and that's another thing that's really hard to do when you got a movie that's perfectly casted. It's really hard to erase your memory of the person in that role and pick somebody else in that role. So I think that says a lot about these movies. And it really is a perfect movie. Back to the Future is close to perfect. There's only a few things I can think of.
What are those?
All right, here's one.
Uh-oh.
Now, at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance.
Yes.
It's the fish under the sea dance.
Whatever.
That's a great line.
The rhythmic ceremonial ritual.
Yes.
That's
right.
He says, you guys got to get out there and play. And he says, man, unless you know somebody that can play guitar, like this thing's over. So Marty gets up there and plays guitar. When Marty starts to dissolve or whatever happens to him, the music stays exactly the same. They did not need the guitar player in that song. Pay attention to the music. It never changes. He's basically invisible, and you can still hear the guitar that Marty was playing in the song. So that's the only thing I can think of that bothers me. And I think his lip syncing bothers me. Those are the two things that every time I watch Back to the Future, they could have got somebody that sounded a little more like Michael J. Fox, to sing that if he had to lip sync it. But those are my only two things I could think.
I would say that's picking nits there. But I hear you.
There's only one nitpicky thing about the entire trilogy that bothers me, and it is in the third movie. There's one scene where Marty or Clint Eastwood is talking to Seamus and Seamus's wife, and it's obviously a really poorly done split screen. And at one point, Seamus walks away, and his wife is still talking to Marty, and she says, I think the line is something like, surely you'll be thinking about the future, Mr. Eastwood, or something. And when she is supposed to be looking at her mark and supposed to be looking at Marty, she couldn't be looking more away from the mark. And next time you watch that scene, you just check it out. She's looking so far past where Marty's standing. It's like one of those things that every time I see it drives me nuts. That is just textbook nitpicking. I agree. It's a pretty flawless trilogy for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the one scene where every time I see it, I'm like, God damn it.
I'm going to go back and watch that. What's great about these podcasts, guys, and yeah, I really appreciate y'all being on my 100th episode of this show, but you have the ability.
We almost got 99.
You almost got 99. But
Fletch,
that's right.
Fletch episode too.
I'm going to order 2 portions of beluga for this 100.
That's right. Charges the Underhills. Give yourselves a tip. What's so cool though about podcasts like ours, the Back to the Future podcast, or like the Laker Jim Fletchcast, is you get to talk to people who are involved, who are there with these great, pieces of art that we love. I've had almost everybody but Michael J. Fox and Tom Wilson on this show. That's Crispin Glover, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Bob Gale, the list goes on of people I've had on the show. I want to ask each of you, out of the people y'all have been able to talk to from the Fletch world, either on the podcast or when it was just the website, who's the one that you hold in the highest regard? We'll start with you, Laker Jim.
Well, we kind of touched on it in the very beginning. Like sometimes you don't want to meet your idols, and I did have one opportunity to meet Chevy Chase, and I was in his home for the day, and really had the most incredible experience with him. He told stories. He was funny. He was in a great mood. And that's not the reputation Chevy has a lot.
Sure.
So it was amazing that I had that experience with him. And I'd rather not have another one with him because I'd love to look back on that and that be the experience. And we've reached out to his people about him being on the podcast. And there's been some interest, and we're just trying to figure out how it could be possible. But Tim Matheson was incredible. Tim Matheson talked to us for a week. I probably edited the episode down to an hour and a half. He probably talked to us over
a couple
2
hours. Easy.
Yeah. It was incredible. He really gave us a lot of time. He talked about his career and everything. And Burton Gilliam was amazing too. The guy said things that he said he's never told anyone before on our podcast, and told the story about him and how him, and I believe he said that on your podcast too. Told us the story about him and how him and Chevy kind of came up with the scene, and they kind of like winged it, and they didn't tell the other guy like what the plan was, and it created one of the most memorable scenes, and obviously the scene that holds the greatest Fletch quote of all time in it too. Yeah. So yeah, it's amazing. I've been able to meet George Wendt and talk to him for a little bit, and he was okay. He was a little standoffish, but unfortunately, a lot of the Fletch actors are not with us anymore.
James Avery.
A lot of the people have died, and director Michael Ritchie has passed. Gregory McDonald, the original writer. So there are some people still on our wish list. We would love to speak to Gina Davis. We would love to
Dana Wheeler Nicholson.
Dana Wheeler Nicholson, who played.
Just reached out to her.
Yeah, so we have some people we still want to interview on the podcast. We've only been at this for less than a year,
right?
We still got some noise to make in the world of Fletch.
Well, I'll say this too. Stepping away from meeting the people who were involved in the movie, I love when we have a phone number that people can call in and leave voicemails. I love when we get voicemails from just regular Fletch fans that just, they leave us a really weird voicemail where they're impersonating a character or just throwing a ton of movie lines at us. But we love getting those kind of messages from people. Just the connection with our audience is a great thing too. And we had a recent contest for a Confess Fletch hat that we got in our possession that we were going to give away to a caller. And for our next episode, you're going to hear some really cool calls for some really cool fans, that we'll play. But it's just cool sometimes just to connect with the fans and the other people that love Fletch as much as we do. I always say, I think that in my first job out of college, I would have never gotten anywhere in the company if I wasn't a Fletch fan, because my boss's boss was actually a massive Fletch fan. And we used to constantly just throw Fletch lines at each other. And I think he took a liking to me. And that could be one of the main reasons I got promoted in that company. So you never know what kind of doors being a Fletch fan or a Back to the Future fan will open for you.
And I think what our podcast offers is we're that buddy that you grew up with loving Fletch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Between the three of us, there's a lot of guys out there that probably love these movies and don't have a friend like that they can quote movies lines with. We're that buddy for that fan. And I think when they tune into our show, it either takes them back to when they were in their friend group watching Fletch, or if they just need somebody that they can relate to. Oh my God, these guys are just like me. And that's what we hear all the time. You guys are just like me. I'm just like you guys. So that's, we're fans. We're for the fans. We're by the fans. It's a cliche, but it's really true when it comes to our podcast.
Welcome all Fletch fans.
Jake, you were going to say something?
Well, I think we're really happy that it all kind of goes back to where it started, and that was with Gregory McDonald. And I think, it was nice to have him, at least when we had the website, to have that interview and to have his blessing, and the fact that he was just such a big part of that website in its infancy, and how it really, I think, started to catch on. And the fact that, I think even though he's gone, he's still with us. And I think he would be incredibly happy with what we're doing, that we're continuing to honor his character. And the fact that, as I said earlier, we still have close contact with his family. And I know they're over the moon with what we've done. So I think to have that, I think, is a big part of it. I think it means a lot to us. And I think moving forward, I really think there'll be a good chance that we'll be able to talk to these people that are continuing the legacy with Mottola and Ham, and hopefully this Confess Fletch will just be the beginning. I hope that we really get to see more of these Fletch movies in the future.
Well, let's hope that this one is a huge success. Confess Fletch is out here in just a couple of weeks when most people are hearing this. I really appreciate you, Laker Jim, Jake, Bob. All three of your pants are on my hope chest after this interview. I've really enjoyed talking to you all again. It is Laker Jim's Fletchcast. You can find him all social media at I am Fletchcast. The show is great, and y'all all are great. Can't wait to experience Confess Fletch with you all and keep listening to the podcast. Just thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very little.
Want to give a big shout out to my guest on the 100th episode of Back to the Future, the podcast. Want to give a big shout out to Caseen Gaines making his third appearance, and to the Laker Jim Fletchcast. Laker Jim, Jake and Big Bob. Make sure you go listen to their podcast and check out Confess Fletch. Let's make sure that they can make more of these things because I love those books and I love the first two movies. As I'm sure a lot of you do, make sure you leave a review, follow the podcast, give us the 5-star ratings, do the things that you're supposed to do 100 episodes in. And next week, the season finale of Back to the Future, the podcast, season 9. But until then, I'm your friend in time, Brad Gilmore. This is Back to the Future, the podcast, and I will see you in the future.
Oh, Brad, what have you done now?